America, my name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Thursday about this time, and today I'm going to talk about the problem with white schools. It's going to be a very fascinating show, and people are very confused because, maybe these schools have higher test scores than your neighborhood school full of broke black people or non-white people or whatever. But there's a big problem in these schools, and we have to be honest about what the problem is, how it is realized, and what it means for both white and non-white kids in those schools. So what makes a school a white school? I'm going to start off with a little bit of rehearsal of Gary Peeler's argument from his book, Critical Race Consciousness. Peeler's a law professor at Georgetown. It's actually a really lovely book. It's impressive. And he starts off talking about Malcolm X, and Malcolm X is like, look, the difference between a segregated school and a non-segregated school is that a segregated school, white people run the school, and a non-segregated school, then community members run the school, be they white, black, whatever, right? So that's actually it's a good understanding. If your school is determined by the needs of an ethnic class, then it's a segregated school, which means a lot of HBCUs, especially as they chase after that Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott / Mrs. Mackenzie Bezos money, they're not really run by black people. And that tells you, it's not an accident that W.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Wilson both got fired by HBCUs. So there's a way in which HBCUs are white schools, because what makes a school a segregated school is that it's not run by its community, by the community it's supposed to serve. Instead, it's run for the interests of white nationalists. And there are a lot of schools with black people that are run by the interests of white nationalists, not necessarily the interests of black people. So those are just segregated schools. They're not, they're not schools that are supposed to cultivate us into freedom and democratic self-governance with other people, right? So that was Malcolm X, as reported by Gary Peeler. So a segregated school isn't necessarily a school with only one race in it. It's a school where there's in America, where the white ethnic interest determines the curriculum. And make no mistake, a lot of your black schools are determined by a curriculum and priorities and a sensibility that's not necessarily consistent with securing justice for black people, and is not actually teaching black people what they need to learn. So you can go to an all-black school that is still a white school. Right. All right. So I just want to clear that off, because I think it's a helpful rule of thumb or heuristic on how to think through what we're talking about when we talk about segregated schools and white schools and black schools, and it's really about whose interest is the curriculum design and the structure in support of, right? If it's in support of democracy, it's not a segregated school. If it represents the community, it's not a segregated school. But if it represents, white interests exclusively, it's a segregated school. Doesn't really matter the racial makeup of the school. It's still a segregated school insofar as the curriculum is ethnically based. Insofar in terms of white supremacy, all right? So I think that's clear. Like, Malcolm X doesn't put a finer point on the opposite of this. Isn't the community necessarily running the school, but the school being founded on democratic principles? I guess I can do a whole show on that. But either you have a school that's cultivating people to live and share power and govern with people as Americans, or you have a white supremacist school. So either your school is teaching democratic principles and accountability, or it's just a white supremacist school. So if your school is to tell the truth about, the American Revolution and Jim Crow and the racialized degradation of black people that was enshrined in law and is realized in all like property and civil relations, then your school is functionally a segregated school. It's functionally a white supremacist school. So that was the way of an introduction, just so that you can identify what a segregated school is, what a white supremacist school is. It's a school that's its entire curriculum, or not entire curriculum, but substantive or preponderance of its curriculum is organized to shield white people from themselves, from the uglier parts of themselves in a way that's actually averse to securing racial justice. Right? So what I'm going to talk about mostly in this video is we're going to go through a few excerpts of my wonderful niece, Osei-Frimpong. She's a soccer player. Oh, she's more than a soccer player. She's a wonderful human at Washington State. And she plays soccer there. She grew up in Vancouver, Washington, which is a suburb of Portland. And she went to a big Christian school. So my uncle, this is my uncle's daughter's kid. So my cousin's kid. My niece, I guess, once removed, I don't know. So my uncle and my dad both came over from Ghana, and my uncle settled in Vancouver, Washington, which is on the Washington-Oregon border, and my dad settled in California. And all right, and then my cousin was a U.S. national team soccer player. My cousin was a big deal soccer player, huge deal soccer player. Actually, she would be even a bigger deal, I think, if at the time, this is 2007, 2008, the U.S. was really committed to not having too many high-profile black people because, Tina Frimpong was very black. And very good. She scored a ton of goals for the University of Washington, and they moved her to defense. But really, she's pretty much... She had the goal scoring of Abby Wambach, except she could actually run. Like she ran like a deer. So she could have been probably the most dominant player in soccer, but she wasn't part of the white ponytail gang. And that's what we were really pushing in women's soccer at the time. And we're kind of pushing now, but make no mistake. The one game the U.S. team did start her at forward, which was her position. She scored a goal. like you put her up there, she was very good at that. She just wasn't. She was very black and she would have been very dominant. And I don't think the U.S. women's soccer was ready for that. But we can talk about that and another. I have a lot of thoughts about U.S. women's soccer because I actually like watching women's soccer, and I don't hate the U.S. women's team. I have questions and I have concerns and about the priorities and the direction of the program, but I can do a whole different show, maybe not on Thursday, on my thoughts on U.S. women's soccer because it's fascinating. And, teach my daughter soccer, so they play soccer. Anyway, so this is her kid, Mackenzie Frimpong, and she's just talking about how what it was like growing up having a mom who was, a professional soccer player, and Mackenzie's dad is white, and Mackenzie's mom is, my cousin on my African side, so she's dark black. So this is just a quick introduction.
I went up to her. I was talking to some of my friends in middle school, and they're like, "If you're not having fun with it, you should tell her." And I was like, "Okay, guys, here goes nothing." And I told my mom, I was like, "Mom," after school, I was like, "Mom, I would like to quit." And she just said no. And then we did that. I never asked again, and I'm very thankful because I was just being a little punk. But I just think it's funny. Different parents are. I went up to her. I was talking to.
So you have to appreciate it. One thing I like about that clip was that you can imagine my cousin parented a lot like I did about if my daughter ever came and said, "Well, I want to quit playing soccer. I want to quit playing music." I would be like, "All right, that's good that you told me what you want to do. Now let's work on this drill, or it's time to practice now." So I'm not one of these kind of laissez-faire American parents who just kind of think, well, it's got to come from the kid. It's what the kid wants to do. No, kids, you tell them, you set a path, and they can hop off the path when they're after, they're 25. so it's there's a responsibility as a parent to set the right path with the amount of flexibility and play. But make no mistake, there is no laissez-faire parenting. It's barely parenting. I think it's bad parenting, which is why I talk more about families than probably a lot of other YouTubers, because I have no problem telling parents how to parent their kids. And like I said, I have no problem telling anybody how to parent their kids, and I don't have any problem telling white people how to parent their kids, and they're screwing up their kids. And then they're screwing up their kids who then live with our kids, and then we have a vested interest in white parents screwing up their kids. So Now she's going to talk a little bit about what it was like going to this predominantly white school, because she went to a white Christian school from kindergarten through high school that was full of, jerks, right? So I'm going to play 2 clips back to back, and you'll kind of get the sense of what she was wrestling with. Mind you, this is Mackenzie, my niece, Washington State soccer player, has been scoring a ton of goals ever since, and assists, because unlike a lot of the women in the U.S. national teams, like Mackenzie can actually pass. So she's fantastic, and this is her just kind of talking about what it was like growing up in that white environment.
You're taught like, oh, well, I'm not being called this, that, and the other, but they're making little comments, so it's like, oh, I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. That's always how I was. And so middle school, I started dealing with a little bit of microaggressions. Just people in that area had some interesting outlooks.
Yeah, outlooks, worldview.
Yeah, worldview, just stuff like that. A little bit interesting. So I was learning, but my big thing when I was at Kingsway was to just blend in as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So I would identify as a Republican in that time, unfortunately. Can't win them all. But yeah, then into high school was when it got, I would say, much worse, because the education level of race, gender, don't even talk about gender at Kingsway because there's only 2, quote unquote, for them. Mm-hmm. Sexuality, like it was all just like, we didn't talk about it, and if we did, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. So going through that was very interesting for me, and I didn't even realize a lot of the stuff that I went through until I graduated and left. But I don't want to harp on them, because I think that there's a lot of great people at that school, and I was taught a lot of awesome things, but there was a lot that went unnoticed and uneducated and like untalked about. So that's mostly my experience. You're taught like, oh.
So you have to understand that if you're going to a school like that, you're going to a school that's functionally a segregation academy. And the segregation academy, like, it's an entire school that's organized around you not being a real person, or not being a person for whom equal respect should be met out, right? And you add the religiosity into it. It's like a deeply mutually reinforcing white nationalist regime in a way that's not particularly healthy for anybody, and confusing and distortive. And so this last clip I'm going to show you is Mackenzie talking about an incident that happened at her school, wherein a visiting soccer player, was a black guy, played soccer, was taking a penalty kick, and then the white kids started whiting in the audience, and they were making monkey noises and all that stuff, and the school quickly disavowed it, except also didn't take any responsibility for creating the culture that allows it to be a thing. And just how Mackenzie kind of worked on her and worked through, and what she kind of thought about it. And you just have to understand that this is what we ask people to do, and it's not really fair. I don't think it's really fair for the adults not to adult, and for the kids to have to kind of, deal with this kind of nonsense. All right, here you go.
So David Moore, soccer player at Seton Catholic High School, rival school of Kingsway, the Holy War. He was going for a PK, correct?
Yeah,
penalty
PK
kick.
got called.
PK gets called, and as he's lining up to do a shot, you hear monkey noises in the crowd. And my thing with this, as somebody who attended Kingsway, and this was coming from the Kingsway student section, disgusting behavior, but unfortunately not surprising or shocking at all. What were the emotions you went through seeing that from the school you attended?
Yeah. Watching that was definitely hard, but in a really weird way, I'm so grateful that it happened, because I've been talking about stuff that Kingsway students have been saying for the past literal 10 years. I've talked about it to my mom, and she's like, I'm sure this, that, and the other, maybe they don't. And she's always, trying to make peace of the situation. But now, you can, it's a video. You can't, make that up. I felt bad for him, because being a black athlete anywhere especially in those a private school, like just how Kingsway is. I know it's hard as is. So to have Kingsway students saying that to him, and like, it really makes me mad. But above everything else, I'm just happy that we were able to catch that on video, and now like he's using his platform to create so much positive change. One thing that makes me mad is Kingsway says it wasn't their student now.
Yeah.
But it's like no student's gonna be like, oh yeah, that was me in the viral video. That's like I'm not saying it was a Kingsway student, because again, we don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know why a Seton Catholic student would be doing that to their own person. I don't know again, but I'm very, very willing to bet that it was one of the Kingsway students, and I think the way that Kingsway is responding to it is just not enough. They're just trying to shirk it off, in my opinion, rather than deal with it. And so in my tweet, I was like, I think this is a great opportunity, regardless of who said it, regardless of, whatever. It's a great opportunity to just educate your students and maybe have one of our many chapel talks that we have every Wednesday. Maybe we could just talk about some injustices and some things that people have to go through and how to make people feel comfortable in your community. So I think overall it's just a good learning experience, but it's so annoying that it took this incident, because that will affect him regardless of how positively he may be, reacting to it. That'll affect him forever. So yeah, I'm just happy he's making good of the situation, which is really powerful.
Yeah, no, my thing, especially seeing how Kingsway is dealing with the situation, is really, it's a letdown, and
100%.
It's on brand with the lack of accountability. And my worry is that they're going to find the student or students who did it, and they'll get suspended or expelled or whatever, and then they'll have like the assembly like, oh, like this isn't okay, like don't do this, and then just move on from it. And there's not going to be any more education on these kind of things, and these kids are going to keep going on in this pattern that we've seen for so many years of Kingsway students in these small private Christian and Catholic schools where they're so uneducated in these fields.
And it's, in my opinion, because the school's being funded by these higher up parents, and the superintendent of Kingsway values those people, and you can tell that he doesn't really value the actual, students. I remember it was posted one time on a Kingsway account. It was asking for money for donors, and it was like to help Kingsway students who need it, blah 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 blah. And it's a picture of a black kid and a black mom, like a black family. And people are like, okay, it's fine, but it's like, obviously that's not the demographic of the school. So why is that being painted as the person who needs help the most? And how is that okay?
You of the sororities on campus here, where they have like the one
token
Hispanic girl, and then it's like, she's in every
and like
promo clip.
I had a big falling out with Kingsway because of me coming out and dating my girlfriend. So they unfollowed me on Twitter, on Instagram. I'm shut out from that school. But my picture is still on the sports brochure website, I think, to this day. So it's funny to see how they value you and what they actually care about.
Yeah, like,
and then they wonder why it's a little bit frustrating when these issues happen. Oh, but you represent me here, and you think so highly of me here and as a sports person, but I'm unfollowing you because you're gay and you're going to hell and all this stuff. It's frustrating. We don't take all of you.
Yeah. Just what you did for us.
Exactly.
So David Moore.
So there's no amount of SATs like improvement or Christian education that could make that acceptable. I mean, that's a quality of torture, and the gaslighting involved, and the idea that, no one's going to believe you. And then, like, look, if you're going to send a kid into that environment, you got two ways. Either you're going to spend all your time making excuses for the whites, or you got to teach your kid to fuck those fuckers. Fuck those fuckers. Fuck those stupid fuckers. And you got to go in with that attitude. And as a parent, I think it's very healthy. And there are dangers to not instilling that attitude into black youth, because a lot of black youth go into these spaces and think they're white. And that just ends up with a lot of confusion and all sorts of degradation. And it's not particularly good for black people in general. So you have to go in with the attitude of like, fuck those fuckers. And that's what you have to instill in your kid. And that's just how it is. And you could do it. The softest way you can do it is, look, it's not their fault. They're fuckers. They were raised that way. It's a problem. It's a deficiency in their culture. But make no mistake, fuck those fuckers. And if you ever think that something's happening to you, you're right. Fuck those fuckers. And like, that's the attitude you got to instill in your kid. And that maybe you could survive that way. But if you go the other way and have your kid always constantly making excuses for them, that's just not a recipe for success. It's a recipe for confusion and ultimately degradation in not an obvious way. So yeah, that's by the way, someone asked that's my niece Mackenzie. It's my niece Mackenzie Frimpong Ellertson, Mackenzie Ellertson, and she plays soccer at Washington State, and she's just like a wonderful human being. But you have to understand that that's a form of torture. That's a form of torture, and then the gaslighting on top of it, and then you having to make excuses and trying to blend in, and it's assimilating into a form of white supremacy and white Christian nationalism, and that's not particularly healthy for anybody. And it's funny, they talk about how, they liked her when she was scoring goals for the soccer because she scored a lot of goals for Kingsway Christian School. She scored a lot of goals for them. She liked them for the color. She liked them on the brochure. And then when she came out and started dating her girlfriend, they cut her off. That's, I don't remember the part where Jesus was cutting off people from the flock, but they cut her off. So they like her for the goals. They don't like her for like who she is in all of her ways. And I think that's not particularly Christian in my view. I have a problem with that as, someone who actually thinks that religion's a good thing in the nation in general and could be a lot better and is actually, as it's realized, it's not particularly good. But it's important in general. And so you can't just make a secular nation and have it be like, fulfill all the people's needs in the way that nation should. So, so they liked her for her color as long as she kept her mouth shut. My friend once had a saying about Muhammad Ali. Everyone liked him a lot more once he lost his ability to speak, once he was rendered mute. So, that's kind of like what it was with Mackenzie Ellertson. They liked her as long as she was a puppet. But as soon as she actually started thinking her own things, they're like, we'll take your goals. now shut up and score goals and assist for us. Don't actually have things to say and curriculum challenges. And so, she talks about later on in the interview, she talks about how she went to a friend's house and then she couldn't go inside because the friend's grandma doesn't like interracial couples, and her mom's black and her dad's white, so she's an abomination. And it's funny because apparently the grandma adored her mom, but thought very poorly of the white guy for screwing up the game. And you gotta, like, a lot of these white women know exactly what this game is, and that's why they they blame that dude for screwing up the game. And then, so that was like another story about dealing with her racist friend's parents. But notice her racist friend said, no, you wait outside while I go deal with my grandma. It's not like the racist friend's not going to fight grandma, because then you jeopardize the inheritance, and white people are not going to jeopardize that inheritance. Old money's a lot of money. And in Oregon and Washington, old money's all white. And in Oregon, that's by design. But you have to understand what that means. You have to understand what all of this means. So what you're dealing with when you send a kid into that viper's nest, I would just never do it. You would not find me sending my kid into a a white school like that. I just can't imagine why that would be the case. Now, I have the privilege of doing this because I can educate my kid on their own. Like, my mom sent me to a white high school, but, you know, she was a working nurse, and like, I'm just more confident that no matter what my kids get in school in terms of content, I just assume they're going to learn everything that matters from me anyway. Right. So, like, they learn math from me, they learn history from me, they learn everything from me. So the school is just supplementary education they're going to de facto get at home, because I don't trust any of these institutions to actually teach my kid. I just want them to, like, hold steady, so when they come home on weekends in summer, I'll actually teach them everything they have to know. But I happen to be a guy who, like, is kind of a rapacious reader and knows things and thinks about how to bring up humans in a way. And I try to do that every Thursday at about this time. So if you appreciate what I do, go over to funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, $50 a month so I can keep doing it, and share this video with your friends. And we got to just think what we mean, because this idea that these white schools, even if they have the higher test scores and are Christian, are the best schools is actually doing a lot of damage in terms of confusion about the problem. And it's not particularly good for white people either. It distorts them. So we need an audit, right? We need to audit their standards, and we need to talk about this version of Christianity. We need to talk about this version of education that's functionally white supremacist, and in an institution that is functionally white supremacist, right? So the education and content is functionally white supremacist, functionally white supremacist, but also the structure of the institution, where Mackenzie had to felt comfortable, or felt like she had to assimilate into it. That's just no way to be a person. She talks about how she just had to kind of roll with her friends using the N-word casually, just because, like, that's fine. Her white friends doing that, and it's just, we don't talk about the violence and the terrorism that goes along, that accounts for Black degradation as it stands. Right. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Be very careful. The test scores aren't worth it. The test scores are not worth it. And and if you take anything else from this video, just understand that the difference between a segregated school and a non-segregated school isn't necessarily the mono ethnicity that's in the school, because you could have a Black segregated school. You can have a Black white supremacist school, which arguably a lot of HBCUs are, because that's where the money comes from. And so if you're not trying to tick off whites, if you're trying to teach Black people, but you're doing it in a way that's not trying to tick off whites, you're just a white supremacist school in a Black face. You're the Obama of schools. And there are a lot of Black HBCUs that are the Obama of schools. We'll teach Black people. We'll just teach them in a way that makes sure that they're like not going to tick off the whites, right? But you're not going to ever secure justice for Black communities that way. There'll always be a yawning abyss between the quality of education that you'll get at those kinds of schools and the justice claims that are required for Black people. So the opposite of a segregated school, either white or Black, is going to be a school that's run on democratic principles, which means we're preparing people to govern the world, which means they need to know the truth about history. They need to know the truth about the way race happens to operate in the United States, and the truth about law, and the problem with trying to assimilate a degraded class into an order of white supremacy and what that means. In a capitalist economy where we don't own anything, like, you're teaching Black people as a people that they're free when we don't own anything. Like, we don't own commercial real estate. We don't own, like, you can't function freely in a capitalist society if you don't own anything. So you're pretty much teaching them to suck up to the people who do own anything. And not maybe necessarily, they can live in a Black community that's not directly sucking up to the people who own things. But insofar as when the people who own things want to tell those Black people what to do, they don't have the skills to say, like, no, and they don't have the resources to fight against them. So it's functionally, you're like renting. You have your freedom on layaway. I said this a few years ago, but the draw of those kinds of white schools and white environments is that you try to get a kind of contact freedom, not actually freedom, contact freedom. You feel like, well, everywhere white people congregate, in serious numbers with decent amount of resources, there's clean water. So if I live amongst them, I don't have to worry about lead in my water. Whereas if you live amongst black people, just know that you need to check the water. It's not just in Flint, Michigan. Anywhere there's like zip codes full of black people, you need to check the water because, the pipes might have been not maintained. And there might not be resources for deferred maintenance, right? So you try to get a kind of like, it's the equivalent of a contact high, or you're next to somebody who's really getting high. Black people, we have contact freedom by getting in those white spaces, but that's not the same as freedom. And that shouldn't be contact freedom shouldn't be the end goal, because that's always still contingent on the person you're next to kind of wanting to be next to you. Right? So contact freedom is not freedom. By the way, once again, if you want me to be real free and you want me to keep doing this show, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com, and maybe I'll do a whole show on contact freedom next week. It's been a while. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Next week's show is going to be on contact freedom and how that's not the same as real freedom, but it feels like it. But you're still, under the sway of somebody else. A lot of people have contact freedom through their jobs because, they have these jobs, but they can't actually be black on the job. They can't actually be honest on the job because the job, 30% of the job is making white people comfortable about their whiteness. And so if that's 30% of the job, in addition to the other job, then you can't actually be who you are on the job. So you do it for contact freedom. Your white colleague at that same job is actually free. Participating on a par with equals, but you have contact freedom. You're free because in some way you have the same job title as this other person who's white. And now if you have the same job title as a lot of other people who are black, you might not even have contact freedom because they'll just degrade the whole job. And with that, I will talk to you next week, and we'll talk about contact freedom. Not the same as real freedom. It's the freedom you get from being next to someone who actually has real freedom and being confused and having some of the same classifications as someone who has real freedom. But that's just contact freedom, like a contact high. All right, later.